Welcome to Hashtag Trending, the weekend edition. I'm your host, Jim Love. A lot of people have asked me about the former IT world. Could it be revived? Well, I'm not sure. Even if there were potential partners and purchasers, I've personally offered to support any person or group that would like to do that. But why didn't we revive it? Well, let's speculate. One reason might be, let's say hypothetically, if there were some company like a foreign competitor that laid claim to some of your trademarks for that organization, and their claim could be totally bogus. You could sit in a lawyer's office, they could tell you there's no way they're going to enforce this, but that's enough to scare investors away. A big company with access to one of Canada's largest legal firms, big legal budgets. So not only in this case would you be trying to face the challenge of trying to revive a publication in a difficult time, if that happened, you'd be facing thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in legal fees and delays. And that could be enough to place a chill so that the assets couldn't be sold, the mailing list, the site. And if you kept that up long enough, the value of the assets over time just diminishes to the point where it's not worth saving. But if you were motivated purely by commercial concerns without a sense of fair play, it's a strategy that could work. This type of legal trolling is more widespread than you might think. And remember, law firms don't care if they're using their firm to bully a small company. They care if they get paid. They are amoral. Well, some of them are. Fortunately, in some cases, there are lawyers with principles, people who could probably make a lot more money being purely guns for hire, but who use their abilities for good. I think we've got a couple of those on our program today. Joana Lee, the Linux Foundation and Cloud Native Computing Foundation's VP of Strategic Programs and Legal. Welcome, Joanna.
Thank you, Jim. Good to be here.
And Shawn Ambwani, the co-founder of Unified Patents. Welcome, Shawn.
Hey, thanks for allowing us to talk today. We're very excited.
We'll start with you, Joanna. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today.
So I am a recovering lawyer. I've practiced law for a couple of decades and been working in open source and open standards and all things open collaboration for more than a decade. And I love, love, love open source. So now that I'm at the Linux Foundation and Cloud Native Computing Foundation, I oversee a number of strategic and legal programs for both foundations.
And Shawn, tell us a little bit about yourself. I picked up you're known as the anti-troll. I like that, but also a good music fan too. We'll talk about that other time. But tell us a little bit about your business life.
I actually, got a law degree, but I didn't really practice in a law firm. I ended up doing startups, technology startups in the video space mostly. And I did a couple of those. A couple were successful, a couple not, and ended up actually through a weird way in patent licensing. And then ended up co-founding Unified after that to really stop what we consider was invalid assertions that were happening in the space.
So I talked a little bit about this, but my intro is sort of related. I have a tremendous empathy for people who are trying to work in the open source space and find themselves being attacked or victimized, I guess you could call it that. I don't consider this to be a victimless crime. All kinds of companies use trademarks and patents, and that's a good thing. But this whole idea of trolls or what are called non-practicing entities, can you guys tell me a little bit more about what this is and what the threat of it is?
Yeah, absolutely happy to. So patent trolls or non-practicing entities, these are companies who don't sell products, don't sell services, don't develop innovation. Their sole business purpose is to buy up patents and then threaten companies with litigation to extract settlement payments. That is their sole purpose of existing. So these are companies that really prey off of innovation without contributing to society.
There's been a lot of increase in that, primarily because the cost of litigation is so high. And as communities such as open source communities have become more successful, what's ended up happening is that they find it an easy way to sue many companies at the same time to extract settlements. And that's a business model.
Right. And just to be clear, patent trolls chase any broadly adopted technology, whether it's proprietary or open source. But as the open source becomes increasingly ubiquitous and cloud native, open source in particular, which is why CNCF is joining during the fight in a very active way now, it does become a more attractive target because this is very much a numbers game. Patent trolls want to sue as many companies as possible. So the more broadly adopted and successful a technology is, the more companies they have to go after and shake down for money.
So how do they get these patents? I thought the patent industry was supposed to prove that you were the author of this or you had some intellectual property rights.
Yeah, so there's a lot of background to this. The short version of it is that as patents have always been relatively easy to get, the goal of patents has been to be transparent. So people publish in exchange for getting a monopoly on that idea. But as things have moved along and they've made it easier and easier to get patents, or the cost of obtaining a patent is pretty low, the amount of quality checking of what they're getting has gone down as well. The exchange was okay for companies that are getting the patents because it's a numbers game a lot of the time, especially in tech. Just how many patents are you getting? And keeping it easy and low cost was a good way of helping everyone in the system make money. But what ended up happening is there's a lot of low quality patents that have come out of the system then that didn't get checked by anyone as to its validity.
Yeah, and just
So they just
so how
go
patent
right ahead.
trolls often get patents is as they buy them. So a company may be, say, it'd be a startup that's going out of business and it sells its patents. And there's a patent troll, or a company that's no longer going to continue operating a particular division, so it no longer needs those patents. And sometimes selling them to patent troll is a way to monetize them.
And then I didn't ask you this earlier, but how do they find their victims?
It's pretty scary, actually, sometimes how they find it. They just kind of go online and go down the list and do searches for technologies that they think might be relevant. And then they just collate a list and send complaints out.
And so you're part of the open source community and you're working hard. We know the people who do this work incredibly hard. Many of them work full-time jobs and then they'll be taking care of or contributing to this. So they work really hard and they get a notice when people are going after them.
Well, patent trolls are typically targeting companies, adopters, and vendors of open source technologies and products that incorporate open source technologies rather than the developers, fortunately. And that's because patent trolls are wanting to make money. So it just makes more money to sue a company than an individual developer, which is both fortunate and unfortunate. So they're going after companies. We are concerned that if this trend continues and it's unchecked, it could eventually impact adoption. There are companies in our ecosystem and CNCF who are concerned about this. Fortunately, this is not a new problem in the sense that we have successfully dealt with this before in other communities. So the Linux Foundation, together with Open Invention Network, Microsoft, and Unified Patents in 2019, formed a partnership and created the open source zone. So Unified's open source zone, which means a zone of technology area and that Unified protects through a variety of patent deterrence strategies and tools. And that has been very successful. Unified has invalidated quite a number of patents owned by patent trolls, and over time has deterred patent trolls from targeting, for example, the Linux kernel and several other foundational open source technologies. Because cloud native open source is becoming very ubiquitous, it's naturally attracting attention of trolls. And that's why CNCF has also joined this partnership. We're expanding this partnership because we want to achieve for cloud native the same success that we've achieved in other open source ecosystems. And that's for patent trolls to conclude, hey, it's just not worth going after cloud native open source because the community has banded together and found strength in numbers and they're united. So they're just too hard to shake down.
So you've got over 1,300 companies in this, the members of Linux Foundation and CNCF.
So there are many companies join the Linux Foundation, CNCF, and they pay membership dues, which helps us fund all the programs that directly support our open source communities. There's not any additional fees being paid to access the NPE deterrence benefits. So we partnered with Unified. CNCF and the Linux Foundation are both very proud to be sponsors of Unified patent deterrence programs for the open source zone. And So Unified is going to be providing CNCF and Linux Foundation members directly with access to a number of advantages and benefits to help deter NPEs. And that includes NPE risk analysis, regular updates on NPE campaigns, and a suite of other benefits that will depend on the membership tier. But that is just the beginning. So in order to really effectively deter patent trolls from the space, we are going to need both companies and developers to join the fight, participate in unified programs. We are also going to need to raise funds to finance the expanded deterrence efforts that we're going to need to meet the increase in patent troll activity in the space. I just want to mention for developers as well, there's a call to action. One of the things we love about Unified and why the Linux Foundation and CNCF are so proud to partner with them is they have a uniquely community-oriented approach to deterring patent trolls. There is a variety of community-oriented programs that really help the ecosystem find strength in numbers in a coordinated defense strategy in countering trolls. And one of those community-oriented programs are crowdsourced prior art contests. So prior art is basically showing evidence that an innovation existed and was publicly known before the patent application was filed. And if prior art exists, that means that the patent to innovation wasn't novel or non-obvious. And those are requirements for a patent. So when you show that prior art, it helps demonstrate a patent's invalidity. And for a patent troll, that means taking away their weapon or at least significantly reducing the scope in which they can use that weapon. So Unified hosts crowdsourced prior art contests where any technologist can contribute evidence of prior art for an opportunity to win a cash prize. So you can win a cash prize, have some fun, and be a hero in this fight by demonstrating prior art. And the results are published on Unified's website, so it benefits the entire community. So any company that receives a cease and desist letter from patent control can go to Unified's website and say, hey, actually, I don't think your patent's valid because there's published prior art on this.
So what does this thing prior art mean? Bearing in mind, most of my audience is technical. What does that mean? I have an idea, proof that your idea was there, but what forms does that take?
Shawn?
Yeah. So there's all kinds of different ways you can show it. Usually it's done through patents. Sometimes it's done through what they call non-patent literature. For example, manuals or submissions to a standards body or other things that are public or that the members of that technical area would have understood to be existing or had access to. So it's simply in evidence, public evidence that you didn't invent this. That's what prior art basically fundamentally comes down to is you did not invent this. Someone else did it before you. Therefore, you cannot get a patent on it since you were not the first to invent it. Because remember, that's really what you're looking for when you're looking for kind of an invention that promises exclusivity, which is what you get from a patent. You have to be the first person in the world to have come up with this idea.
I got to ask this. There's always these stories of, the telephone wasn't really invented by so-and-so, but somebody raced to the patent office. That's not true then. If you invented something earlier and you can prove it, the patent.
Yeah.
And I'm not asking for legal advice, but.
Yeah. If you can show anywhere in the world that someone came up with that idea before you cannot get exclusivity on it. I mean, it doesn't mean someone else can get the patent. It just means that you can't get it and can't keep it. But, generally speaking, Jim, that is not a cheap thing to prove a lot of the time.
Right.
In order to get that done, you have to go to the patent office or you have to do it in court. Court is extremely expensive. You have to go through the trial and everything else. And you got to show to sometimes a bunch of lay people why this patent's invalid, which is not an easy thing to understand for anyone, even a lawyer. If you look at a patent, they're indecipherable sometimes, if you're not familiar with the area. Alternatively, if you go to the patent office to try to invalidate or show that a patent's invalid, so they shouldn't have gotten issued, that can take hundreds of thousands of dollars and take years to figure out too. For someone to get sued, though, you don't have that time or that money a lot of the time and resources. So that's really what these NPEs or trolls play off of a lot of the time is the cost of all this litigation, the cost that it involves having to fight these things for a lot of companies is just economically unreasonable or just not feasible. And it's a bad business decision to fight a lot of the time. It's better just to settle. And they feed off of that because if I can settle with, make 100K from 1,000 companies, that's a lot of money.
So imagine 100 companies all getting sued, and that would be a low number in an NPE campaign. But imagine 100 different companies getting sued by a patent troll. And the patent troll and the cost of litigation, for each of these 100 different companies are all paying, they have a choice to pay their lawyers, to do prior art searching, to gear up for litigation, et cetera, or if they can just hand over their lunch money to the schoolyard bully and make them go away, right? Now, imagine if these 100 companies band together, pool their resources, and fund invalidity proceedings or other deterrence efforts through Unified. Now, that means that effectively they're only paying a fraction of the costs to fight this patent trolls campaign. And with an ally, Unified, that has a tremendously high success rate. So Unified has a more than 90% success rate in invalidity proceedings against trolls. So again, the power of community, when companies are coming together, when they're working together, when they're uniting their resources, when they all get together and say, hey, we're not going to let this troll bully us, we are going to fight this fight effectively, it's so much more powerful than when the companies are all acting in isolation, having to foot all the expenses themselves and negotiate without allies. It makes them much more likely and vulnerable to just paying the troll some exorbitant settlement fee, which is still less costly than litigation, just to make them go away. And so that's why the community banding together and participating in these programs of Unified, it really disrupts the economic model that enables trolls to prey on innovation.
So just as a point of curiosity, when you go to invalidate these patent claims, do you have to go to court, or how do you handle that on behalf of 100 people?
Well, first of all, one of the nice things about the US legal system is there's a lot of transparency in it. So if you do file a challenge, you can file challenges for invalidity in two major places. And then there's other strategies as well, as Joanna mentioned. The key thing is you can file in district court to invalidate. It's usually part of a trial. Those can be expensive, in the millions of dollars in some cases, to go all the way to adjudication. So for a lot of people, if that's just unreasonable, there's no way. The other way is administrative side. You can go to the USPTO and do various processes there to do the same thing. Both of these are fully public. So the declarations and everything that's shown, anyone can rely on them later. They can see those things, which is great. But, it takes a long time to get through, and there's appeals and all kinds of other things, and it can end up being very messy. And then the other way that Joanna mentioned that we do is patrol and other things where we essentially just publish prior art to the web. And so that's not actually invalidating the patent, but simply showing kind of from a point argument perspective that this patent's invalid. And so people don't have to spend legal resources to prove that over and over again. They can just go there and say, this is easy evidence, and it gives leverage to them, but also decreases the leverage the other side has. Because people will say, well, your patent's not valid, so I'm not willing to pay very much money. And the NPE is going to have a much harder time kind of justifying any settlement amount that they might come up with, which decreases their profitability. Ultimately, the goal here is not to end the ability for people to assert patents. The goal here is simply to lower the cost of challenging bad patents in the first place, so that people do not invest in purchasing those and asserting them. Because a lot of the time, what's happening is NPEs need patents that are broad so they can go after as many companies as possible. The broader the patent, oftentimes the more likely it is to be invalid, because it covers real estate that simply wasn't part of the original invention, but they want to cover it for very strategic reasons. And so then you have a very broad patent. Great, it goes after a bunch of companies, but oftentimes the broadness of it makes it inherently invalid in a lot of cases. I mean, it's been traditionally prior to a recent enactment in Congress about 10 years ago, patent troll issue was getting a lot worse. And then they instituted some changes that have brought it down to a more manageable level, but it's still very large. About 85% of all the assertions that occur in the tech space are patent troll related. So a huge percentage, because the economics are still there for them to make money off of it. That's simply the reason why they do it. You have an unlimited supply of patents out there. So it's like an ocean of patents you can choose from. The question is just, do you think you can get a return? Without us or something like us, it just means that probably there's just going to be more assertions because there'd be more profitability. And, ultimately it's an ecosystem, like any ecosystem where you have kind of wolves and deer or some other thing like that. If you have too many deer that are grazing and there's no wolves, what ends up happening is the ecosystem, there's a die-off because there's going to be another solution to the problem. Tech companies would go to Congress or find other ways to deal with it if it was a massive train, which is what I would expect.
If they assert this patent and you can't afford to defend it,
You settle.
what do you do? Your
No, you
idea?
settle.
You settle?
No, you settle. I mean, that's generally the choice that you have in most cases.
Right. Meaning you pay the patent troll to not litigate.
Does
Yeah.
anybody just ever walk away from the tech and say, to heck with it?
I mean, it's hard to know sometimes because it's hard to prove a negative. There are definitely technology areas that are harder for small companies to enter because the cost of entry is so high and the licensing issues associated with it are so high. That's definitely been the case. And then there's examples where there's kind of low barriers to entry for various strategic reasons. One great example is Tesla. Tesla has used a great supporter of open source traditionally in a lot of their technologies. But just in the automotive space, about 100 years ago, there was a ton of litigation in automotives. And they all kind of reached a detente at some point to not sue each other because they thought it was kind of unproductive, I think, in the end to their goals. So they kind of made a non-aggression pact between all of them. I don't think there's anything formal. It's just kind of like, you don't sue me, I won't sue you. You guys do whatever you want on the production side. And that allowed Tesla to kind of grow into the car manufacturer it is because simply the other car companies were comfortable with a new entrant coming in and not just suing them for patent infringement because that wasn't the industry standard. Open source is a direct result of a lot of the licensing issues, in my opinion, that have occurred in the past in tech. The idea of having a transparent kind of mechanism to transport source code, understand the architecture, and be able to innovate on top of it is a direct result of all the IP licensing issues that have surrounded other technologies in the past that have made it difficult for people to be able to communicate these things, kept them as trade secrets. They made it hard for innovation really to flourish.
You've had a tremendous success rate at this. When you entered the game, does anybody say, I'm out of here. I'm not going to fight you on this one?
Yeah, it happens all the time. We get settlements from companies, NPEs that literally, and this is our only model for getting settlements, is we tell them, listen, if you don't give us a free license for all our members, we're going to have to kill this patent. And if they give us a free license, then we don't file or we don't challenge their patents. They know it's invalid. There's Ambwani's rule. Ambwani's rule is the more this is my law. The more the more companies and NPE sues at the same time, the more it knows its patent isn't good. Because it's suing based on the idea that it needs to create litigation and costs to basically get settlements. And it's suing a lot of companies because it knows it's not going to get a lot of money from each one of those companies. So it has to get volume. The more it sues, the more companies it sues, the more it knows its patent is usually crap.
So where does this partnership go? If you're successful at bringing this together, what do you see happening?
We would love to rally the open source developer community to contribute more to prior art. We'd also love to get more companies to join the fight, participate meaningfully in unified patents programs, and consider sponsoring unified patents. So in order to meet the rise in NPE activity targeting cloud native, we are going to have to raise additional funds to fund those deterrence efforts. Companies often find that participating in unified programs is actually more cost effective than just fighting the fight alone, because they are benefiting from UP deterrence activities that enhance their own. And they're part of a support network. They have access to tools and strategies and information that arm them in their negotiations and their own deterrence efforts, NPEs. What we hope to achieve is that patent trolls decide cloud native open source is just not the area to target, and they go away.
Okay. And so to the worldwide hashtag trending audience out there, if somebody really wants to come in and support this, what should they do? Join the Linux Foundation? How should they tackle this?
Contribute prior art to our crowdsourced open source, our crowdsourced prior art searches. Join the Linux Foundation or CNCF. You will get access to some benefits, some deterrence benefits just through that membership. Also consider joining Unified Patents directly. There are membership fees that are very well worth it. It's actually free for startups, right, Shawn? So joining
That's true.
Yeah, Unified. So for startups, it's free to join Unified, participate meaningfully in Unified programs, and help raise awareness, both within your own companies, within the ecosystem. Encourage other developers and companies to join the fight, because we are stronger together. If we find strength in a united defense strategy, it's going to be far more effective than individual companies acting alone in isolation, which makes them much easier prey for patent trolls.
So if you want to be a member, contribute, or whatever, we will post links on our show notes for anybody out there. And if you want those, check this out at technewsday.ca or .com. Take your pick. The show notes will have the links where you can join up and take a positive stance towards increasing innovation and the wonder of open source. I'd like to thank you, Joanna and Shawn. This has been fascinating. Something I didn't know a lot about till you contacted me and went, wow, this is a big deal. Thank you for doing this. Like I said, I think people could make career choices that might make them a heck of a lot more money. And some people go into some things that are just for the good of us all. And we appreciate it.
Thanks, Jim. And thanks for having us here. The listeners and viewers of this podcast also have an opportunity to join the fight and also be heroes in any of the ways you mentioned earlier.
And that's our show for this week. I'd like to thank our guests, Joana Lee, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, and the Linux Foundation's VP of Strategic Programs and Legal, and Shawn Ambwani, patent troll opposer par excellence, and the author of Ambwani's Law. Thank you both.
Thank you, Jim.
That's our show. We'll see you next week.